शरण्ये प्रभु कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं शरण्ये प्रभु कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं शरण्ये जय जय राम कृष्ण शरणं राम कृष्ण शरणं राम कृष्ण शरणं शरण्ये राम कृष्ण जय जय राम कृष्ण जय जय राम कृष्ण जय जय राम कृष्ण जय जय राम कृष्ण शरणं राम कृष्ण शरणं शरण्ये प्रभु कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं शरण्ये प्रभु कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं कृपा हि केवलं शरण्ये जय जय राम कृष्ण शरणं राम कृष्ण शरणं राम कृष्ण शरणं शरण्ये
Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swami Tapaharine. Salutations to the Lord of Renunciates, the sage Vivekananda, whose nature is existence, consciousness, bliss absolute, the master, the remover of the miseries of sentient beings. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So this morning, the topic is the real Swami Vivekananda. And as I mentioned, I think it was last Sunday, for those of you who are here, it'll be a repetition, but the actual title I would like to give, but it's no longer remembered by people. Even those born in America, it's not remembered. What to speak of those who came later to America. There was an old TV program, I think it was the program called To Tell the Truth. And the idea of the program, it was sort of a game show, but not with random contestants. It was with the same famous personalities that were the contestants every week. There would be someone, a man or a woman, who had some interesting story to tell about their profession or something that had happened in their life or something, but some interesting story. So the three of them, there were three people who were pretending to be the person whose story was being told. And so the three of them would tell the basic story, and then the contestants could ask them questions about what they had said in order to try to figure out which one was telling the truth. And so then at the end of the show, then the host of the show would say, now will the real so-and-so, in this case, will the real Swami Vivekananda please stand up? And then the people and the three contestants, one of them would go like this and sit back down, and the other would like that and sit back down, and then another would, and they would go back and forth until finally one of them stood up. And so he was the one about whom the story had been told. So I used to, on this same topic, the same idea of this topic, not exactly the same lecture, but the same idea, I used to give the title, and back in the 80s I could still give the title, Will the Real Swami Vivekananda Please Stand Up? Because then people still remembered the old TV show. But those who were born after the late 1950s, or those who came to America after the mid-60s, then there's no way that they would know the reference. Anyway, that was the idea of the earlier title, Will the Real Swami Vivekananda Please Stand Up? And the reason for the title is that Swami Vivekananda is seen in so many different ways. And so who is the real Swami Vivekananda? Now it's difficult to know anyone. As you know, it's the setup for various movies and television comedies and so forth, where a husband and wife who have lived together for 40 or 50 years, one day one of them just says, who is this guy? I still don't know who he is. So it's difficult to know anyone because people are multidimensional. People have many different aspects, and they have, we come into, if you accept, as most of us here do, if you accept the idea of reincarnation and karma, we come into this life with tendencies from the past. And sometimes the tendency suddenly comes out, which hadn't been manifested before. Or sometimes a person shows a particular tendency which they had kept hidden for a long time just because they either weren't interested or they wanted to keep it hidden. And then suddenly it comes out and surprises those who know them. So people are multidimensional, and oftentimes the inner person is hidden. We don't often show who we really are to the public because we have learned, unfortunately, we've learned through many experiences in society, at school and later at work, that certain aspects of our person might be misunderstood by people. And so we have a public face that we show to the public, that which we want people to think I am. That face that we want people to recognize as me. And so first of all, we are multidimensional, many aspects to our being. Some of those are hidden even from ourselves. And then we project an image. That's especially true now more than ever. It's always been true, but it's especially true now where people are taught. This is something that's become accelerated in the last 20 or 30 years, where people are taught that they have to sell themselves. And the whole idea of writing a resume, where you're told what not to say, you don't dare tell the truth, you tell what the employer is likely to want to know. And of course, you shouldn't make up degrees and so forth, because that can be discovered that you're lying. But at least as your tendency is, oh yes, I'm the most loyal person that this company could possibly get, or I work very well with others, and so forth. We project an image that is hireable. And so even in ordinary society, among our friends, sometimes even among our families, we project an image that we think will carry us well, which will do us well. And so again, it's very difficult to know a person. The famous psychologist Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist that all of you have heard of, Carl Jung, he famously said, one of his discoveries was that people generally project the opposite of what they feel inside. That's why sometimes a person who seems extremely egotistical, actually the person has a very weak sense of self. That's why they're constantly saying, oh, I did this, I did that, I'm so important, I'm this, everybody loves me, everybody appreciates me, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. It's because inside there's a hurt little person that feels extremely vulnerable and weak. And so we talk about ourselves all the time in order to promote ourselves, because we feel that otherwise we're just going to disappear into nothingness. Or many times you find someone who seems aggressive, socially, seems aggressive, and then you find out when you get to know them that they're extremely shy. And their aggressiveness is because they're so shy. They're afraid of being hurt, or they're afraid of being taken advantage of, or whatever. And so they project an aggressive face in order to protect themselves. And so, again, and then another characteristic you often see, someone who seems extremely humble, but they're actually very self-centered. They say, oh no, I'm not worthy of this, or I'm not worthy of that, oh no, I'm so small, I'm so insignificant, oh no, don't praise me, oh don't do that. But they're always thinking about themselves. It's, I am so this, and I am so that, I'm so lowly, and I'm so humble, and I'm so, but I is at the center of it. And so they have learned that by projecting a strong ego, they don't get their way, but somehow they learned that by appearing very humble and very subservient, they can get their way. And that they have learned a strange lesson, but it's quite common. And so all of this means that it's very difficult to know anybody. Multidimensionality, the inner person is hidden, and then we project oftentimes the opposite of what we feel inside. When you come to Swami Vivekananda, the difficulty is much greater to know who he is. First of all, he was not just multidimensional, as all of us are. Every living person is multidimensional, but he was not just multidimensional. He was that, but he was infinite in extent. Infinite in extent. No matter where you try to touch him, where you try to pin him down, you find that he breaks all barriers. He was infinite in extent. His inner, in the case of him and great souls, his inner person was not hidden. He was on the outside what he was on the inside. He didn't hide anything. But with him, the problem is that he was transcendental. The real person was transcendent, beyond our senses, something that we can't see, something that we can't understand. So in Swamiji, there was no hidden inner little person that he was trying to protect by not showing who he really was. No, he was completely transparent. And that's what true humility is. Swamiji was not one that you would normally think of as humble. And yet those who knew him said he was the most humble of people. Not because he was the, oh, I'm nothing, I'm so weak, I'm unworthy. No, there was none of that in him. But he had true humility. That is, he was completely transparent. He had nothing to project, nothing to prove, nothing to try to show other people. And so in one sense it's easier to know someone like Vivekananda because he was perfectly transparent. But on the other hand, it was not at all easy because the inner person was transcendent. He was beyond all normal human bounds. And so it's difficult to speak about Swami Vivekananda. You all know how Swami Vivekananda was asked once by Girish Chandra Ghosh to write the life of Sri Ramakrishna. And Swamiji said, you ask me to drink the ocean, ask me to pound the Himalayas to powder, ask me anything, but don't ask me to write the life of Sri Ramakrishna, because I'm completely unworthy of writing his life. I'm afraid that in trying to describe his life, mine would be the case of the person who, trying to make an image of Shiva, made an image that looked more like a monkey. And so I won't attempt the life of Sri Ramakrishna. That was also true of Swamiji himself. Trying to depict Swamiji was almost as hard as depicting Sri Ramakrishna. Sister Nivedita was asked by Swami Ramakrishnananda to write the life of Swamiji, and she also refused and said, that I can't do. To write the life of Swamiji, I'm completely unfit to do that. All I can do is to write my memories and my impressions of him. And so she wrote, the Master as I saw him, because she was afraid Nivedita, who knew Swamiji better than anyone, Swami Ramakrishnananda, one of the direct disciples of Ramakrishna, brother disciples of Vivekananda, said that none of us have understood Swamiji as Sister Nivedita has understood him. So she, according to Swami Ramakrishnananda himself, no one knew Swamiji as well as she. But she said, no, I can't pretend to write a life of Swamiji. I can only write what I knew of him. And so Swamiji was so vast that we have to pick and choose that which we want to say about him. And when we speak about Swamiji, we find that we tend to resort only to superlatives. And people who don't know of Swamiji, who have not encountered him, have not read about him, studied him, think that sounds awfully, well, that's ridiculous. Talking about him in such high-flown language. He had feet of clay just like everybody else. And so even when you try to be true to him by speaking in the only terms you can think of, which are superlatives, you find that people who don't know of Swamiji think that, oh, that's too much. That's all exaggeration. That's ridiculous. When you think of Swamiji, you can only think in terms of the sun, a vast, luminous sun, illumining the whole world. You can only think of him as the ocean. You can't think of him as a wave. You can't think of him as one of the inlets to the ocean or anything else, but the whole vast ocean. Not even limiting him to the Atlantic or the Pacific, but just the whole global ocean. The only thing that you can think of is in terms of vast like that, like the sun, like the ocean, like infinite space. And so that's the Vivekananda that we know. When I first came to Vedanta, I had read a few books on Vedanta. Many people ask me about my coming, and everyone seems to assume that, I must have met somebody, some Swami or something. No, I didn't meet anybody. I didn't meet a Swami until I had already come to join the Vedanta, several days after I'd come to join the Vedanta Society. That was when I met the first Swami. When I got there, the resident Swami was out of town. So I came because of books that I had read. And the books that I had read, several books that I had read, about 6 or 7, made a deep impression on me. And I was deeply impressed by the Vedanta philosophy. And the Vedanta philosophy, as it turned out, was as explained by Sri Ramakrishna Swamiji and Swamiji. That tradition of Vedanta is what I had read. So the Vedanta philosophy was very attractive. Sri Ramakrishna, I'd read some about him. He was very attractive. The idea of the Divine Mother was very attractive because coming from a Protestant Christian tradition, growing up in a Protestant Christian tradition where there was not even the Mother Mary, the idea of God as Mother was completely new to me and was extremely attractive to me. So all of these things were what attracted me, and I went to the Vedanta Center in Chicago, the Vivekananda Vedanta Society, as it was then called and is now called also. I went there to join, having found out about it, with the idea that I like the philosophy, I like Sri Ramakrishna, I like the ideas so much, let me join. And when I got there, as I said, the head Swami was not there, and so I was there for a couple of days. One day, one of the devotees asked me what I had read. And so I said, oh, I've read this, and this. And so she asked, well, you haven't read anything of Swami Vivekananda? And I said, no, I'm not so interested in him. Because in one of the books I had purchased, I had read that Swami Vivekananda, that Swami Brahmananda was the great spiritual power of the Ramakrishna mission, that Swami Vivekananda went around the world like St. Paul, giving lectures and inspiring people and so forth. But Swami Brahmananda was the spiritual powerhouse. And so I thought, well, that's what I want. I don't want somebody who goes and runs around giving lectures and all of that. I don't like St. Paul to begin with, at that time. And so why would I like Swami Vivekananda? And then I had read in another book where it said that egotism is extremely hard to get rid of. Even the great Swami Vivekananda wrote in a letter that behind my purity was fear, behind my work was ambition, behind my this, that, and that. It's one of Swamiji's most beautiful lectures, but this was taken out of context. And so when I read it, I thought, well, behind his work is ambition, behind his purity is fear, and all of that. I don't want that. So this Vivekananda character, I'm not interested in him. So again, this devotee asked me what I read, and I mentioned the books, and she said, but there are no books of Vivekananda. And so I said, no, I'm not interested in him. I'm more interested in Ramakrishna and Swami Brahmananda and the philosophy. And she said, but this is the Vivekananda Vedanta Society. You should read something about Swamiji. And I said, well, I don't know what to read. What should I read? So she handed me from the library Swami Nikhilananda's biography of Swami Vivekananda. Vivekananda, a biography. And when I read that, there was a complete revolution in my mind. Then from that point on, Swamiji was my great hero. In fact, for the next 15 years or so, I was so fond of Swamiji, I didn't have time for Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramakrishna fell to the background because Swamiji was so engaging and so wonderful that I was completely attracted to him. So what was it in Swamiji that attracted me? For one thing, he spoke to me as a Westerner. I came from the West, I was brought up in the West, educated in the West. And I had only lived in America and for 1 year, 12 months in Europe. And so he spoke to me as a Westerner. There was no translation of what he was saying necessary, cultural translation. It was just a direct truth in terms that I could understand. And then I felt that he was talking to me when I read Swamiji. It felt that he was addressing me. So it was, Swamiji was easy to relate to. For me at that time, Sri Ramakrishna of the Gospel, of the Kotamrita, was wonderful, was beautiful, but the Gospel was so foreign. The cultural context and everything was so different from anything I knew that it was interesting, but it was way over there somewhere. Whereas Swamiji was immediate. Swamiji was immediate. And then there was his tremendous heroism. He was a heroic figure. What's his name? The great scholar of mythology. He became very famous. Gosh, I can't think of his name. I know it well.
Joseph Campbell?
Joseph Campbell, thank you. Whoever said that. Joseph Campbell, yes. Joseph Campbell famously said that one of the problems in the modern world is, and also Jung had said this as well, that in different terms. One of the problems in the modern world is that we have lost all of our heroes, all of our mythic figures. That there's no one to believe in anymore. The closest we get to it is a sports hero or a cinema actor. Those are the closest we get to heroes. Or some imaginary figure in a novel. But the real heroes are gone. They've been debunked in a conscious effort to debunk all of our historical heroes. And especially in the West. It's happened somewhat in India, but not nearly to the extent it's happened in the West, thank God. And so he said that one of the problems is we have no one to believe in. We have no believable mythology. Because since science had destroyed the mythology, the Abrahamic mythology of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the stories of these religions had been destroyed by modern science. The idea of 6 days of creation and so forth, and an extra cosmic God who made everything and interfered in history and rearranged things according to his will and so forth. That had been destroyed by modern science. And people were left without a believable mythology. But there in Swami Vivekananda, I found someone that I could believe in, someone that I could trust without any hesitation, and yet someone who was of heroic proportions, someone who was of mythic proportions, who was a great mythic hero. His life, as he lived it here on earth, was a tremendous life, a tremendous mythic life, of mythic proportions. And so he was heroic, he was bold, he was free. He was the image of freedom itself. And of all of the words, all of the abstractions, all of the abstract words, all of the qualities or abstract words which are most important to an American, the word which resonates in any American heart more than any other, it's freedom. Americans may have and do have a very naive sense of freedom, but the idea of freedom is something that is dear to any American. It's the most dear word of any word to an American, is the idea of freedom. And Swami Vivekananda was free in a different sense. He was really free. He was really free. He was not free in rebellion against somebody. He was not free in getting away from somebody. He was not free in putting other people down. He was absolutely free. And he spoke of freedom. He spoke of freedom. And also, Swamiji was funny. So he was humorous. He was good-natured. He was fun. People who were around him found that he was always fun to be around, and always interesting. And so all of these things were extremely inspiring. And wherever I touched him, I seemed to be touching the infinite. Wherever I looked at him, he blended into the infinite. And so all of this goes to say that Swamiji was the image of the perfect man, the perfect person, beyond gender, but we say perfect man because he happened to be in a male form, though he said that in my next life I may decide to come back as a woman, because the coming age is the age of woman. But he was the perfect man, the perfect man. And so that was Swamiji as I knew him. Then I went after 5 years. I went to India once after 1 year to get initiation, but just for 28 days. And then I went back to India after 5 years to attend the training center. And there I found a completely different Swami Vivekananda, completely different from the one that I had come to love. In the training center I found a Swamiji who was a national hero, who was a great patriot prophet of India, someone who had defended India against the West, which had done so much to destroy India. The great defender of the faith, the father of the Hindu Renaissance. And many say, and I think it's true, he was, you can't prove it, but many say that he was really the father of the freedom movement. Not the first who sought freedom for India, but it was really Swami Vivekananda that the freedom movement found itself. And so this was the Swami Vivekananda I found taught in the training center, believed in by the Indian brahmacharis, that he was the great prophet of Hinduism to the world. He was the one who came to the West and defended India, defended Hinduism, and showed the greatness of Hinduism, the greatness of India. And at first that was a great shock to me, because that was not the Swamiji that I had known or loved or approached. But in time I saw, no, Swamiji was that also. He was equally that. That also was Swamiji. I had not seen that because it wasn't pertinent to me. It wasn't part of what I was looking for, what I needed. But I saw that, no, Swamiji was that as well. And so I came to appreciate him for that also. So when we come to, again, to the question, who was Swami Vivekananda? I'm going to read several things. I'll stop in between the things I read, but several short passages, more than I usually do. I try not to give lectures which are readings of quotations, because you can read quotations at home. But there are certain things that were said of Swamiji which are so beautiful that I couldn't hope to say them myself in the same terms that they were said by these people. So first let me read a very famous passage from the Leela Prasanga, or the Great Master, now known also as Sri Ramakrishna and his Divine Play, the life of Swamiji the life of Sri Ramakrishna by his disciple Swami Saradanandaji. And he quotes Sri Ramakrishna, what he and others had heard from Sri Ramakrishna himself. So Sri Ramakrishna said about a vision he had had before he ever saw Swamiji, before he had ever seen Swamiji. One day I saw that through Samadhi, my mind was going up by a luminous path, going beyond the gross world studded with the sun, the moon, and the stars. It entered first of all into the subtle world of ideas. So Sri Ramakrishna is speaking as though he were going on a path, that he is traveling along a luminous path. That we have to understand that here and elsewhere, Sri Ramakrishna often used mythic terms, the terms of a story, the terms of a journey, in order to explain something that happened purely in consciousness. And so he's speaking as if he were traveling on a luminous path beyond this realm of the sun and the moon and the stars and everything. But no, his mind went beyond this realm, first of all, into the subtle world of ideas. The more it began to ascend to subtler and subtler strata of that realm, the more did I see beautiful ideal forms of deities existing on both sides of the path. It came gradually to the last extremity of that region. I saw a barrier of light there separating the realm of the divisible from that of the indivisible. Now in the actual Bengali, he says, I saw there a fence separating the barrier, the realm of the divisible from the indivisible, the khanda from the akhanda. So again, he used very homely terminology in order to give our minds something to hold on to. But he came to the ultimate limit of the realm of the divisible, that is, where there are differences, where differences exist. And came to the realm where on the other side was the realm of the indivisible, where there was just infinity, indivisible, utterly indivisible, no things left. Leaping over it, again, leaping over this fence between the divisible and the indivisible, the mind entered by degrees the realm of the indivisible. I saw there was no more any person or thing having a form. There were no more forms, no persons. As if afraid to enter there, even the gods and goddesses, possessing heavenly bodies, exercised their authority only over realms far below. So even the gods and goddesses exercised their authority over realms below. Here he had gone beyond personality, beyond gods and goddesses, beyond everything that belongs to God, beyond all forms and names. But the very next moment, I saw 7 wise rishis having bodies consisting of divine light only, seated there in samadhi. Again, what that means we can't imagine, because he's in the realm of the indivisible, where there are no persons, no forms, no things, no words. And yet he sees 7 rishis seated in samadhi. So where there are no forms, where there are no persons, how can you have 7 rishis? So what Sri Ramakrishna meant, we can't understand, only if we could have his experience. So he was putting into language that our minds can understand, that which is far beyond language. So I saw 7 wise rishis having bodies consisting of divine light only, seated there in samadhi. I felt that in virtue and knowledge, love and renunciation, they had excelled even the gods and goddesses, not to speak of human beings. Astonished, I was pondering over their greatness when I saw before me that a part of the homogeneous mass of light of the abode of the indivisible, devoid of the slightest tinge of difference, became solidified and converted into the form of a divine child. So again here, what he's talking about we can't imagine. We have to remember that he's putting in terms that we can imagine, something that was far beyond imagination, which was only the result of a transcendental experience. Coming down to one of those rishis and throwing its soft and delicate arms around his neck, the divine child embraced him, and afterwards calling him with its ambrosial words, sweeter than the music of the veena, made great efforts to wake him from his samadhi. So the small child comes and puts his arms around the neck of the rishi, again in the realm where there are no differences whatsoever, no persons whatsoever. The rishi woke up at the delicate and loving touch and looked on at that wonderful child with half-shut eyes, free from winking. Free from winking is important. We wink, why? Because we have fleshly eyes, they get dried by the air, and so we have to keep them moist by winking. But these were ideal forms. It said that the gods and goddesses, one of the signs of a god or goddess is that they don't blink, because they are from a realm where there is no such distinction, where their eyes are not fleshly eyes. Seeing his bright face, that is of the rishi, seeing his bright face full of delight at the sight of the child, I thought that the child was the treasure of his heart, and that their familiarity was a matter of eternity. The extraordinary divine child then expressed infinite joy and said to the rishi, I am going, you must come with me. The rishi said nothing at that request, but his loving eyes expressed his hearty assent. Afterwards, looking on the child with loving eyes, he entered again into samadhi. Astonished, I then saw that a part of the mind and body of that rishi, converted into the form of a bright light, came down to the earth along the reverse path. Hardly had I seen Narendra for the first time than I knew that he was the rishi. So Swami Sahadanandaji goes on to say that when they asked him who was the divine child, Sri Ramakrishna admitted that that was he himself, that he himself was the child who took form out of the infinite as a small child and came and embraced the rishi. The one on whom the rishi looked with the loving eyes, showing that this child was the love of his heart, and that theirs was an eternal relationship. And so that Swamiji was born from the light that came down from that rishi. Now, one thing that I think that this vision shows, which I've never seen mentioned anywhere, I've never heard mentioned, never seen any mention of, was that the sage went back into meditation, and then a light came from the sage and came down to the earth. And when Sri Ramakrishna saw Swamiji, he realized that he was the one who had taken birth. But what's never mentioned is that the sage remained seated there in samadhi. That is, that there was Swamiji who took birth on earth, but the sage remained the sage, seated in eternal samadhi. So when Sri Ramakrishna said that when Swamiji realizes who he is, that nothing on earth can keep him here, because, again, that's my interpretation, but when Swamiji realizes that he is that eternal sage, immersed in eternal samadhi, that that the light which was Swamiji will return to its source in that sage. But the sage was there all of the time. Swamiji was the reflection of that sage. So this was Swamiji. Sri Ramakrishna said that Swamiji was one of the 7 sages. Who are the 7 sages? The Saptarishis. Those of you who at least grew up in India have heard of the Saptarishis, the 7 rishis, and the constellation which is made up of the 7 rishis, and the Puranas speak of the 7 rishis, etc. Well, the idea of the 7 rishis is that there are these 7 primordial rishis, the firstborn sons, the Manasaputras of Brahma, the creator. That at the beginning of the cycle of creation, these 7 primordial rishis are born from the mind of Brahma, eternally perfect. And it's their eternal meditation which sustains the universe. It's their eternal meditation which keeps this a cosmos rather than a chaos, where everything in the universe is constantly trying to separate, trying to go off in its own way, trying to become random. But it's their meditation which keeps the chaos, the natural chaos of the universe, into a cosmos. And so Swamiji was one of those 7 rishis. And so Sri Ramakrishna also said that he was an incarnation of the sage Nara, one of those 7 primordial rishis. There are different enumerations and different names given in different places of these 7 rishis, but in one place, one of them is Nara. And it's significant that Swamiji was called by Sri Ramakrishna Nara, because what does Nara mean? It means man. So Swamiji was the archetypical man, the perfect man. The image of the perfect man was Swamiji. He was the incarnation of man. You know that Jesus says famously in the Bible, and it's never explained in Christianity, or it's not well explained. Jesus sometimes calls himself the Son of God, but other times he says, I'm the Son of Man. I'm the Son of Man. And so Swamiji was man itself, the ideal form of humanity. But Sri Ramakrishna also said that Swamiji was a part of Shiva, that he was a manifestation of Shiva. Sri Ramakrishna also saw that a light came from the direction of Varanasi and came down, and he saw in a vision a light coming from the direction of Varanasi and coming down to Calcutta. And when he saw that light, he said that he knew that the one for whom he was waiting was taking birth. That he knew the one for whom he was waiting was taking birth. When he saw this light coming from Varanasi, that Swamiji was also Shiva. Ramakrishna also said that Swamiji was the greatest man ever born. He said that no one like Swamiji had ever been born before. Now, when Sri Ramakrishna says something, we can of course say, if we want to, that, well, that's all exaggeration, that's all praise, and so forth. But we have to remember that Sri Ramakrishna was the most truthful of beings. He was the most truthful of men, that he couldn't bear any untruth. And so when Sri Ramakrishna says something, those of us who know Sri Ramakrishna a little bit, who have read a little bit about him, then we listen, because he couldn't tell an untruth. And so he said Swamiji was the greatest man ever born. So Sri Ramakrishna used to say that he said sometimes that he was born to introduce Swamiji to the world. He said it's like the case of the person who comes up on stage to introduce the main act, and then the curtain arises and the man disappears. So he said that he was like the man who came to introduce the main act, and that then he disappeared and then Swamiji appeared on stage. And so in such extraordinary ways he spoke of Swamiji. He spoke of him as a 1,000-petal lotus, where his other great disciples, these disciples here, who were great saints, each of them themselves, he said, these may be 2-petal lotuses, 6-petal lotuses, at the most 16 or 20-petal lotuses, but my Narendra is a 1,000-petal lotus. Great men like Keshav Chandra Sen may have 1 power of the Divine Mother, but my Naren has all 16 powers of the Divine Mother in their fullest form. So in those ways he would speak about Swamiji. And once when Sri Ramakrishna asked Swamiji, that is Narendra still, asked Narendra, what is your ideal? And Narendra said, I want to go into Samadhi and remain in Samadhi And once in a while, come down from samadhi to eat a little to sustain the body and then go back into samadhi. And Sri Ramakrishna said, "Chi, chi, 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 what is this? I thought that you were much greater than that. I thought you were much greater than that. That's a very small-minded ideal. I thought you were to be a great banyan tree under which countless people would find shelter, would find shade." And so that, of course, is what Swamiji became. He realized finally that no, he wasn't meant to spend his life in samadhi. He was capable of that. That was his natural state. But Sri Ramakrishna prevented it. And Swamiji finally accepted it, that his life was given to the welfare of humanity. And only then could he go back to his state of eternal samadhi. So these are the things that Sri Ramakrishna said about Swamiji. Holy Mother said something, many things interesting, but one interesting thing I want to say about what Holy Mother said, which adds to this picture of Swamiji, she said that he was the incarnation of India. That Swamiji was the incarnation of Bharata, the incarnation of India itself. And that when you look at Swamiji, he was India itself. There was a great American sculptress, Malvina Hoffman, many of whose works are in the Field Museum in Chicago. She was a great sculptress. And also she's the one who did the sculpture of Sri Ramakrishna and Holy Mother that's in the Vedanta Society of New York, the Ramakrishna Vivekananda Center of New York, and the bust of Swami Vivekananda at Trabuco Canyon. She is the artist who did all of those sculptures. She was a great sculptress. When she was 12 years old, her father took her to have lunch with Swami Vivekananda, the only time she met him. So she was just a little girl, 12 years old. She went and had lunch with Swamiji, and she said afterwards in her, she wrote her autobiography, and she says that 5 minutes in the company of Swami Vivekananda, I learned more about India than I've learned in the rest of my life after studying many books on India. That 5 minutes in the company of Swami Vivekananda, I learned more about India than I learned in the rest of my life after reading many books on India. And so Swamiji was the embodiment of India itself, the embodiment of India itself. And if you want to understand India, even those of you who come from India, if you want to understand India, read Swamiji's lectures from Colombo to Almora. Read all of Swamiji, but read his lectures from Colombo to Almora. Read his conversations with Sharat Chandra Chakravarti. And then you'll begin to understand a little bit about India, because he was that embodiment. And Holy Mother also, when people questioned Swamiji's different ways from Sri Ramakrishna, where Swamiji was teaching service and preaching Vedanta philosophy rather than devotional singing and clapping and dancing and everything, and not teaching Sri Ramakrishna as the incarnation of the age, people questioned Swamiji and doubted that Swamiji was teaching what Sri Ramakrishna had wanted. And then Holy Mother was the one who said that no, it is I see it is Sri Ramakrishna himself who is speaking through Swami. It's Sri Ramakrishna himself who is speaking through Swamiji. What Swamiji is doing is the work of Sri Ramakrishna. And so it was because of Holy Mother that the doubts about Swamiji were among his own brother disciples were set to rest. Swamiji himself said about himself, "I am a voice without a form. I'm a voice without a form." Such a beautiful statement, a voice without a form. Why without a form? Because he saw himself as having no form. There's a famous incident in New York when he was walking back and forth in the parlor, and the only one there was Miss Waldo. She was his secretary, and she was doing some work for him. And Swamiji was pacing back and forth. And she would see that every now and then Swamiji would stop in front of a full-length mirror, an old-timey mirror that would have been in a frame, a movable mirror like this, a full-length mirror, in a frame. He would stop in front of the mirror and look at himself. And then he'd pace for a while, and then he'd come back and look at himself in the mirror. And Miss Waldo thought, oh, so even great men like Swamiji fall prey to vanity. And then after a while, after doing this for some time, Swamiji came up to Miss Waldo and said, Miss Waldo, I have a very strange experience. I have no idea what I look like. And I go and look in the mirror and see, and then I start walking again and my form disappears. I have no idea what I look like. And so then she realized, no, it was because he had no sense of the body, no sense of the body. So he also said that it may be that I will find it good to get out of this body, to cast it off like a worn-out garment, like Sri Krishna says in the 2nd chapter of the Gita, Vasamsi jirnani yatha vihaya, casting it off like worn-out clothes. He said, it may be that I will find it good to cast off this body, to cast it off like worn-out clothing, but I shall not cease working. I shall continue working until the whole world shall know that it's one with God. And so that Swamiji is still working, And Swamiji's identity with humankind, once he was asked about the virgin birth of Jesus, and he said, well, God can do whatever. There are no restrictions on the activity of God. Anything is possible for God. But as for me, Swamiji said, as for me, I'm glad that I was born of a human mother and human father in the natural way. Why? Why was he glad for that? Because he was glad to be a human being. He often said that I may I may have to be reborn, because you see, I have fallen in love with man. I may have to be reborn because I have fallen in love with man. And so Swamiji was Swamiji, one who was the ideal man, one who was identified with humankind, one who was in love with humankind. Swami Subodhananda once had a vision after most of the direct disciples had passed away. Most of the disciples, Swami Brahmananda, Swami Sharadananda, Yogananda, Niranjanananda, and of course Swamiji long before, most of the direct disciples had passed away. He had a vision in which his mind went to a very high realm. And there he saw his brother disciples, Swami Brahmananda, Swami Sharadananda, Swami Yogananda, Niranjanananda, and others, Turiyanandaji. And he was so delighted and so blissful in their company. He saw them in ideal forms. And then he asked, but where is Swamiji? Where is Swamiji? He said, oh, Swamiji is a realm far higher. He's in a realm identified with God. He's in a realm far above this realm. And so that again was Swamiji. People think that Swamiji was all, if you read some of his conversations in his life, you find, and some of his letters and even some of his lectures, it seems like Swamiji sometimes was getting angry and so forth. Swami Akhandananda said that no one had such supreme control over anger as Swamiji, that anger had no control over Swamiji, that Swamiji had the power to put his whole mind and life force behind any idea. And so if he needed to strike down ignorance or to strike down a narrow idea, then he could summon all of that force forth at his will and strike like a hurricane. But it wasn't because he had no control over anger. It was because he had total control over his mind and could throw the whole of his mind behind any idea. So let me read a little bit more before we close. Swami Paramananda said about Swamiji. Swami Paramananda was one of the disciples of Swamiji. He came to Swamiji very young. I think he was only 16 years old when he came to Swamiji and became his disciple. He lived and passed away in this country. He said in his reminiscences, have you not sometimes seen a face so transcendently, benignly beautiful that you cannot turn your eyes away from it? If you have not, I will not argue about it, for I myself have seen such a countenance. And of course, speaking about Swamiji. And then writing about Swami Paramananda, it said, again and again, Basanta, that was the pre-monastic name of Swami Paramananda. Again and again, Basanta witnessed in the great Swami gentleness almost like that in the heart of a young girl. Many people spoke about that in Swamiji, the extraordinary gentleness in him. That's not the image we usually have of Swamiji. One day as they sat on the bathing ghat at Belarmat, that is Basanta and other monks, one day as they sat on the bathing ghat at Belarmat, a rough-hewn boat pulled up to the riverbank. A teenage boy, thin and in rags, alighted from the boat. Vivekananda, gazing intently, called the boy over to him and tenderly asked him questions about where he came from and the conditions there. As the boy described the plight of his native village, where food was scarce and disease rampant, Basanta saw the great teacher's eyes fill with tears. And Basanta realized the lion of Vedanta had the heart of a lamb. And again in his words, Basanta's words, I cannot begin to convey merely through words what my experience was with Swami Vivekananda. We imagine a great man as someone you cannot approach. Swami Vivekananda, however, was the simplest of people. It would have amazed you. His interior was like a child, gentle and mellow, and that was the real Swami Vivekananda. A great, loving heart. Sometimes reading from his books, you do not get quite the picture. I have seen him weeping. I have seen this great soul weeping when he thought no one saw him for the suffering poor of India. His heart was heavy with sadness because there was so much suffering in humanity. It is this, not intellectuality, that makes people great. And it was this which left an indelible impression on my mind that cannot be wiped out. And Sister Christine said in her reminiscences, now and then, at long intervals of time, a being finds his way to this planet, who is unquestionably a wanderer from another sphere, who brings with him to this sorrowful world some of the glory, the power, the radiance of the far distant region from which he came. He walks among men, but he is not at home here. He is a pilgrim, a stranger. He tarries but a night. He shares the life of those about him, enters into their joys and sorrows, rejoices with them, mourns with them, but through it all, he never forgets who he is, whence he came, or what the purpose of his coming. He never forgets his divinity. He remembers that he is the great, the glorious, the majestic self. He knows that he came from that ineffable supernal region which has no need of the sun or moon, for it is illumined by the light of lights. He knows that he was, long before the time when all the sons of God sang for joy. Such a one I have seen, I have heard, I have revered. At his feet I have laid my soul's devotion. Such a being is beyond all comparison, for he transcends all ordinary standards and ideals. Others may be brilliant. His mind is luminous, for he had the power to put himself into immediate contact with the source of all knowledge. He is no longer limited to the slow processes to which ordinary humans are confined. Others may be great. They are great only as compared with those in their own class. Others may be good, powerful, gifted, having more of goodness, more of power, more of genius than their fellow men. It is only a matter of comparison. A saint is more holy, more pure, more single-minded than ordinary men. But with Swami Vivekananda, there could be no comparison. He was in a class by himself. He belonged to another order. He was not of this world. He was a radiant being who had descended from another, a higher sphere for a definite purpose. One might have known that he would not stay long. Is it to be wondered at that nature itself rejoices in such birth, that the heavens open and angels sing paeans of praise? Blessed is the country in which he was born. Blessed are they who lived on earth at the same time. And blessed, thrice blessed, are the few who sat at his feet. And finally, let me read a short passage from Josephine MacLeod. She says, on the 29th of January, 1895, I went with my sister to 54 West 33rd Street, New York, and heard the Swami Vivekananda in his sitting room, where were assembled 15 or 20 ladies and 2 or 3 gentlemen. The room was crowded. All the armchairs were taken, so I sat on the floor in the front row. Swami stood in the corner. He said something, the particular words of which I do not remember, but instantly to me that was truth. And the second sentence he spoke was truth. And the third sentence was truth. And I listened to him for 7 years, and whatever he uttered was to me truth. From that moment, life had a different import. It was as if he made you realize that you were in eternity. It never altered. It never grew. It was like the sun that you will never forget once you have seen it. And so that was the real Swami Vivekananda. Someone who was beyond description, who was beyond all limitations, who was beyond all categories, who was, as Sister Christine said, not great by comparison with others, but greatness itself. Not wiser than others, but wisdom itself. Not more loving than others, but love itself. That was Swami Vivekananda, one who was beyond all categorization, beyond all categories, beyond all conceptualizing. One who was one of the 7 rishis, primordial rishis, in eternal samadhi. One who is the incarnation of Nara, the embodiment of humanity. One who is a part of Shiva. One who is the incarnation of India itself. One through whom Sri Ramakrishna himself spoke. One whom Sri Ramakrishna said was the greatest man ever born. One who was to be a great banyan tree under which countless people would find shelter. That was Swami Vivekananda. One who spoke truth, whose first word was truth, whose second word was truth, whose third word was truth, and who, as Josephine MacLeod said, she heard him for 7 years, and every word to her was truth. She says in another line of her reminiscences that it's like the sun. He was like the sun. Once you have seen it, you can never forget it. And so that was the real Swami Vivekananda. So I'll close here. Let me give a closing chant, and then I'll give some announcements and then audible. Om madhuvatharthayate madhuksharanti sindhava madhvirna santoshadhi madhunaktamutoshasi madhumatparthivagum rajaha madhudyaurastu nah pita madhumando vanaspatir madhumagum mastu suryaha madhvirgavo bhavantunaha. Om madhu, om madhu, om madhu. For us who seek the truth, and for all living beings, may the winds blow sweetly. May the rivers flow sweetly. May the herbs yield us sweetness. Sweet be the night and the break of day. Sweet be the very dust of the earth. May the heavens pour down sweetness upon us. May the trees, lords of the forest, bear us sweetness. May the sun shed its sweetness upon us. May the directions pour forth sweetness. Om, sweetness, sweetness, sweetness.